Good morning. I'm Melanie Risdon with the Western Standard. Thanks for joining us on a Friday and just heading into the weekend soon. Looking forward to it. It is a great day to talk about cannabis. We're going to find out that cannabis is not just for potheads. We're gonna dive into the topic of actually how medicinal cannabis is and some of the great properties that come from the use of cannabis and the different types and whatnot. So if you are kind of one of those people like I was who really didn't know much about it other than the option to smoke pot, let's stick around because we're gonna give you a good cannabis 101 today. But first, we're gonna check in with our newsroom, and our news editor Dave Naylor is standing by to update us on some of the stories we've been working on this morning. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Mel. Happy Friday to you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, we've got some interesting stories up already, and some more stuff we're working on for a lovely Friday afternoon here in Calgary. It's actually a story you did, Mel, that's topping the site at the moment about a Tabor man who got stuck in some chaos in Toronto's Pearson Airport. And he said his flight and hundreds of others were herded like cattle into a small room where they were basically standing shoulder to shoulder while they did some rapid testing. So he's less than pleased, and it does sound like a very disturbing incident. Our energy expert, Eva Sundek, she's got a story on CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, very bullish on the Alberta and Saskatchewan oil markets for the upcoming year. They're saying that there's going to be billions and billions of more investment into the patch this year. So with oil trading now in the higher 80s markets, it's good news for all of Alberta. A couple of stories out of Ottawa that we've touched on this morning. One is a report on the COVID death rate in First Nations hamlets across the country that are under federal control. Some disturbing statistics dug up there where it shows the death rate, is actually higher than that of Botswana and Kazakhstan and other glamorous places like that. You're going to have to help me on this next story, Mel, because you know how to pronounce it. But we all remember when Trump was going crazy over that malaria drug called
hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine. So when he was tweeting about it, federal government officials in Canada took notice, and they rushed out to buy a whole bunch of it. Interesting type story, because you think most Canadian politicians wouldn't have anything to do with Trump, but apparently the bureaucrats are certainly listening to what he's saying. So that's up on Seamus O'Regan. He's the Labour minister that brought in the paid sick leave bill, while allowing workers to take 10 days of paid sick leave. Well, someone in his office doesn't have a very high regard for the truckers on Canadian roads, because they said the truckers were likely going to be scofflaws in it and take advantage of it. So that's up there on the site now. So lots of good stuff to chew over on a Friday afternoon.
And I know that we're also working on some stories. What else is coming? Anything in the shoots?
Well, our new Edmonton reporter, Amber Goslin's got an interesting story coming out on what I think is a wacky idea by an Edmonton councillor. He wants to license landlords. So if you've got a tenant living in your basement, you're going to have to go down to City Hall and apply for a license, and obviously have, I'm sure there'll be a fee to go along with it too. So just another case of, bureaucracy gone wild, in my opinion. But Amber's going to have that story this afternoon. And to be honest, Mel, whatever else you produce when you're done your TV duties.
Yes, I do have a couple of things that I'm working on, including one. Just double checking here, just looking into where things are at with the Fed's promise to shield employers from employees fighting back against the mandate. So we're going to get some details as to where that's at right now.
Sounds good, Mel. Have a good show.
Thanks, Dave. We'll check back with you in the newsroom shortly. Thanks. All right, so we are going to dive into the topic of cannabis. We're going to learn a little bit about cannabis and the use of it. There's all sorts of medicinal properties that I'm sure people have heard about. And joining me right now is Morgan Dakin from High Ground. She's a manager with High Ground, which is a cannabis producer, and they're going to be growing cannabis here locally for bulk sale. Yeah, it's not, High Ground is not one of the distributors that you can go to and buy from.
Not right now.
Not right now, but will be. So Morgan is going to chat with us today a bit about the background of marijuana in general, and we're gonna just learn a little bit. I know I had a lot of questions for her, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who do. I mean, this is fairly new to a lot of people. I think there's still a stigma around it for a lot of people that it is a drug that you get high on, and really there is so many different forms of it, so many different uses for it that I think it's definitely worth diving into, especially when you find out how beneficial it can be for certain ailments and illnesses, anxiety, depression, sleep issues, things like that. So Morgan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's start out with a little bit of background on marijuana in general, cannabis in general. Yeah.
Well, I mean, where to begin? We're talking about a plant that has been used for medicinal purposes for millennia through all sorts of different cultures. We find evidence constantly through archaeology of it being used for medical purposes, for spiritual purposes as well. This is something that's been around for a very, very long time. And it's only around 1937 or so that the United States and other Western nations began imposing stricter prohibitions against it. And you can get into the reasons why they did that. There are many different ones, certainly. A lot of support from the pharmaceutical industry and the pulp and paper industry to keep cannabis and hemp and things within that family down. They were very supportive of that. But to give you an idea of how constant it was back in colonial America, the Spanish missions, many of them made it a requirement for farmers to grow hemp. We're talking here in the early 1600s, places like Virginia, Massachusetts. It was the way it was. And then it's only in the last century that we saw it get pushed down.
So hemp is the plant.
Hemp is, there's the cannabis plant, and hemp and marijuana are sort of within that family.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So hemp is break down the plant if you can.
Lord.
Yeah.
The plant, can I say, the part of what makes cannabis so amazing is the fact that it is so complex. The amount of study that we have to do to even begin to understand it is extensive. And we've lost a lot of time in the last 100 years that we could have spent studying it, unfortunately. Hemp, the biggest thing with that is that it lacks the THC aspect of cannabis that people relate to the high.
Right. So the THC is the chemical that creates the
feeling of a body high.
Right.
Exactly. Okay. And it itself is broken down to several things. You might have heard of things like Delta 9, Delta 8, THCA, THCV. There's different kinds of it within the plant. And in addition to that, it has many things called terpenes, flavonoids. There's so many degrees of complexities to it. Now, hemp lacks a lot of those extra complexities, and it's those things that make medicinal marijuana so effective. Something called the entourage effect. When you have, for example, just CBD, a lot of people have heard about CBD, the fact that it is without the body high and the mental high. But it's found medicinally that when CBD is used in conjunction with bits of THC and other flavonoids, we find far greater impact and effect from it medicinally towards what people need to do. It's all working together to create this effect. And that's something that we're just constantly trying to study and try to understand better.
Right. So with the difference between the CBD and the THC, my understanding is that you can get products from the dispensaries that have, say, higher CBD, lower THC, or vice versa, higher THC. So again, the CBD tends to contain more of the medicinal properties.
Actually, that I would say is something that is a common misconception.
Okay.
That CBD is like this miracle element within cannabis and the rest of it is just sort of extras. Not true at all. Every aspect of it is medicinal in different ways.
Okay.
THC, for example, binds with the receptors, and it's a huge impact around things like pain, mood. It's been a huge help with things like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, nausea, glaucoma. All of that comes down to the THC element. Now, CBD is the element. It helps a lot with anxiety, chronic pain, and particularly neuropathic pain. That's the kind of pain that we see a lot more effect on the CBD, whereas muscle-based pain and pains like that seem to respond better to the THC. So it is complex, and because there's such a variety of conditions and situations and different things within the plant that you would be able to use for different things, we're trying to figure it out to make it easier for people, particularly patients, to better dose and choose the cannabis of both the method of ingestion as well as the specific strains that they need that will be most effective for them, because it does change from strain to strain.
So for a person to be sort of educated what's best for them, for whether you're dealing with an anxiety issue, whether you're dealing with insomnia, a sleep issue, whether you're dealing with pain or something neurological, where do you go to get, a good advice? I mean, you had mentioned you can't necessarily go to the dispensaries and ask them for their opinion or what you should be taking. What's the best route?
Yes. Now, obviously, for purposes of regulations, things like that, here in Canada, when you go to a recreational dispensary, there are certain rules that they have to follow. They are not licensed clinicians. They are not doctors. So they are not in a position to have you go in and go, hey, I can't sleep. What is it that I can take that would be good? They might at most be like, well, people tend to take an indica to fall asleep. So something along those lines. Regulations are very strict regarding what they can and cannot say, which is why I always suggest your best bet is to go to a cannabis clinician. There are many different kinds around that you can get recommended to. You can even, especially with COVID, they've made them accessible via online meetings and things like that. They'll be able to give you an idea of what to get. But I will say that particularly for medical cannabis, as it stands right now and the way the system is, it's very much a personal journey. It really is. It's a lot of working with people, talking to people who have experienced taking the plant, talking to people who either on social media or doing a lot of your own research, a lot of your own trying different things, a lot of experimenting. And as a result, it can be a bit more of a process in order to find the medicinal cannabis that really hits it home for you. But it also is what makes cannabis such a personal medication. It is truly something that you end up tailoring to you, and you end up discovering and going through that journey on your own. It's something that everyone's journey is unique.
A little bit different. Yeah, and everyone, does respond to any kind of medicinal in their own personal way, right? And speaking of that, I mean, cannabis has been used medicinally for a very long time. It was sort of very regulated. And I mean, it's been prescribed for cancer, people who are undergoing cancer issues, chemo to deal with the pain, the illness, the sickness that comes from it. So the medicinal use of cannabis is not new. It's just that
not at all.
Now we have access to it as a general population without needing to have it prescribed, right? Because a lot of issues may not necessarily be, life altering, but people are struggling. I know for me personally, I struggle with insomnia often. So getting some help with sleeping and I don't really want to have to rely on sleeping pills. So things like that. But there's so many different ways to take it as well. Like there's edibles. I mean, again, just talking to the general public who hasn't really experienced much when it comes to cannabis use, I think a lot of people picture just somebody smoking and, kind of looking like
Cheech and Chong piece, dude.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think a lot of people, and that's the stigma that's still surrounding it, is that it's a bunch of potheads sitting around smoking up, right? So let's talk a little bit about getting around that stigma and ways that people can access it, use it, consume it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, to start with, in terms of how people consume it, this is something that I'm really glad you brought up, because I find a lot of people, especially when they're first trying cannabis, their instinct is to go to the edible.
Okay.
Because I think more and more people don't want to inhale smoke. They want to avoid that aspect of it, particularly when you have health problems. The idea of smoking might be something that's intimidating to you.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you're younger and you're looking to start for the first time, especially, or it's just more appealing to eat a chocolate or a gummy and have an effect from that. But I will say that the effect you get from edible is very different from the effect that you're going to get when you smoke. It takes longer for it to kick in. It lasts way longer. It's harder to dose. It's far easier to end up taking more THC than is probably advisable. And this is the thing, is that you're not going to overdose on cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
You're not at all. But especially when it comes to edibles, you can have something called greening out, where you have too much THC in your body and your mind just sort of, it has a bit of a panic. And the best way to get through that is to sleep. And that's why with edibles, you want to, and with all cannabis, start low, go slow.
Mm-hmm.
That is your best bet, especially when you're starting out. Start low, go slow. It might feel strange to just take a little puff or even eat half of a gummy. And you might be sitting there going, that's supposed to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you're starting out and learning it. That is the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Other options from edibles and smoking, I know there are a few others. I know that there are some sprays.
Oh yeah, we have tinctures, which are oils, and those are put in a lot of different ways. A very common way is under the tongue. Another common way is, like you said, a spray, or another more popular way that is gaining traction is, I don't know if you've seen those thin mint strips for freshening your breath. It's basically that, but it's cannabis.
Okay.
And you put it on your tongue and it dissolves. The oil is a way that they're definitely looking at more and more medicinally, because oil seems like something that's easier to prescribe to someone than saying, dry flower.
Right.
Take 3 hoots and see me in the morning. That's
right. Yeah.
It's a little bit harder to describe how you should take it. Whereas with oil, you can say certain percentages and then tell them certain milliliters, and it keeps it a little more controlled.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a way that definitely cannabis clinicians seem to lean towards. Mm-hmm. And like I said, they have different amounts of time. Things like oil, things like edibles can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours to kick in. Whereas with the smoke, it's minutes. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is the length of time. An oil, an edible, you're looking at 6 to 8 hours. And afterwards, not a hangover, but you still have a bit of lingering feeling. Whereas with smoking, you're looking at a few hours at most before you come back down, which allows a lot of people to have sort of greater control of, especially when you have pain issues, you're able to greater control that.
Yeah, and you're able to, make it more specific to particular time, length, things like that.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, coming from somebody who doesn't smoke, so I would likely be not interested in the smoke side of things. Now, what about, do I understand correctly that it can be used with vaping, like vape?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
vape is popular, and if there's even been some times where perhaps you've heard some warnings about vape problems with cannabis. So far, all of the research and everything that's been done into that has shown that those were vape cartridges that were bought from the illicit market. So far, there have not been issues with the legal market and vaping and dry product and things like that. That is very important to point out. It's a big reason why moving cannabis over to a legal market is so important. There are no regulations in the illicit market, and you might trust a dealer, you might trust someone who gets you that, but there is that oversight is what allows for greater consistency. And that is so key, especially with medical cannabis. You don't want a situation like, for example, with pharmaceuticals, when I get a bottle of pills, I know the next bottle of pills I get will have the same strength, will have the same results, will all that. With cannabis, from one bud to the next, it's a little more unsure, which is why consistency is such a milestone within the production world for cannabis. It's why High Ground, which is the cannabis production company that I'm working with, is focusing on growing product via aeroponics, which is a far more controlled medium over, say, outdoor growing or soil and pot growing.
Okay, so why don't we talk just a little bit about the difference between the sort of underground
gray market,
market, and then the legal dispensers. Is there a big price difference? Fill me in a little bit on the difference between the two.
Certainly from the beginning, price was the bigger issue, as was supply. And by that I mean the legal markets, supply and everything. That was a problem at first, but we're finding as the years go by, as the kinks are ironed out and we get used to it, we're seeing that go down more and more. Now, while prices remain slightly higher for sort of the highest quality and the lowest quality cannabis, it remains slightly higher in the legal market than in the illicit. We've now seen a move from the mid-market, which is by far the largest one, to be less expensive domestically and in the legal market than it is in the gray and illicit market. That is a huge move, because mid-level is where the vast bulk of people are. That's
what does that mean, mid-level?
Mid-level in terms of quality. You have different companies. Great. Again, this is something that the cannabis industry is trying to sort out, which is how are we going to grade it? How are we going to measure quality? Things like that. Right now, they're using a system that was sort of used in the past in the illicit market, which is A, AA, AAA, quadruple A. The more A's, the better
quality
it is, the better, usually the larger the bud. It has more what's called trichomes. Those are the things that you want in order to get the effects that you're looking for. You don't want a product that's overly dried out. There's so many different factors to cannabis that would get considered. And with the higher quality quadruple A and the lowest quality 1A, they're about comparable, maybe slightly more for the legal market. But the main difference there, to me, is that the legal market also has consistency.
Yeah.
And it also has a reliability there. That's not to say that there haven't been issues with the legal market and some bad actors, unfortunately. Find me an industry that you're not going to deal with that. But what's been amazing about the cannabis industry is how dedicated so many people are to the actual product, to what it can do, all of its potential. They love it and they admire and respect it. And those are the people in the industry who we're seeing doing better and better and rise up. And that's what we want. And it's what the customers want too.
There are a lot of reasons people take cannabis, and the THC and the CBD and, all of it. There are a lot of different things that it treats, a lot of different reasons. Let's talk about some of that. Let's go into the benefits.
For sure. There are some conditions more than others that are leading the pack in terms of cannabis's ability to treat them. And as I pointed out earlier when we were talking, it's been used for medicine for millennia, and usually for the same stuff: trouble sleeping, stomach problems, nausea, things like MS, Parkinson's, chronic pain, neuropathic pain. Cannabis has been prescribed and used by people for centuries and centuries. And now the studies that they're actually doing, now that they legally can, because it's important to remember that cannabis was next to heroin as the only two drugs that were classified together in terms of danger by the CDC in the United States. The idea for anyone, I think, that who's tried cannabis, that those two would be compared to each other, let alone be grouped together, is absolutely ridiculous. You see the benefits of, and we're seeing now that it's not just, in people's minds. There is legitimately improvements. Very recently, for example, with cancer, it's more than just how it helps with nausea and with the pain of cancer. They're finding that CBD in particular seems to actually affect the cancer cells. Recently, in a Petri dish focusing on breast cancer cells, it directly shrunk them and affected them in a positive way, where it was able to. That is huge. And it's something that, to be a little personal here, both of my parents had cancer and both of them used cannabis. This is before it was legal here. And so I guess I'm outing them, but I will say that I saw them get pumped full of every kind of pharmaceutical you can imagine. And the only thing that made them able to eat, that made them able to sleep, was marijuana. Of all, a plant that grows in, there's places like Bhutan, China, where it's a weed. It grows so commonly on the side of the road. They're constantly feeding it to cows and trying to get rid of it. This is a plant that's just out there and available. And the fact that it's been there and available for so long for so many different conditions it's frustrating. We're doing better now, but everything is pointing towards it being a big help. A big thing, especially, is epilepsy. And particularly with CBD, CBD has now been recognized by WHO and by other international entities as it doesn't mess with your head, not like THC. So it's not an intoxicating thing. CBD is the one that really seems to hit hard with epilepsy. And it's the one you might have seen stories about, say, on CNN. Dr. Gupta has been doing an ongoing series called Weed, which I do recommend checking out. And he visited with a lovely, very young girl named Charlotte, who had a very specific strain of cannabis made for her. It's called Charlotte's Web, and it was very high in CBD. Your typical CBD content in cannabis is usually like 1%. It's low. To get high, and most people aren't as interested in it because it doesn't give you the high, right? So why would you want to be on it? This is why. This is why you want to be on it. And very tragically, she actually passed very early in the COVID epidemic. From COVID, she caught it. And she was just a child, but her legacy is the fact that the videos of just these children getting a couple of drops of CBD oil, they're shaking uncontrollably in so much pain, and it just melts away. It's a miracle to watch. It's amazing to watch. There are videos, I cannot recommend them enough, just because to see it, it feels surreal that this is just here, and how it can be illegal when it's obviously showing these great moves forward for these conditions. And the other thing I think it's truly going to be helping more and more with is seniors and women. The fact that THC and CBD working together in particular are huge helps to things like endometriosis, which is a big problem for a lot of women. It is being found not just through studies and clinically, but also, of course, through many, many people's personal experiences, just how incredibly effective it is at helping things like endometriosis, like chronic pain, which women are, in terms of patients, it's something like 3 in 4 for chronic pain sufferers are women. It's far more common for women. And it is a huge helper in those fields. It's a medication that I think a lot of people, like you said, have sort of the, yo, dude, that's the sort of thing that
the
they
perception.
imagine. We all went to high school. We all had the stoners in the class, and that's what we have in our heads.
Right.
I will say for myself, I didn't start smoking cannabis until I was in my mid-20s. I didn't even try it before then. I wasn't interested, and didn't start using it regularly for my own medical purposes until my mid-30s. And I have been on every pharmaceutical under the sun, even good old Oxy, off all of them, off all of them. And the fact that I am functional is just a miracle. And it's something that for women more and more, I think we're going to see them coming to this, because it's a plant it's a medication that allows you to continue to function. And I know this sounds sort of hippie-ish, but it helps you find yourself. It manages to both silence your mind and engage your mind at the same time. And that's why I think a lot of people also have such a personal relationship with marijuana once they start using it regularly.
And find out what works
exactly
for them. So do you mind sharing how it helped you? Like what?
For sure.
Yeah.
I suffer from several pain conditions. I have chronic pain caused by nerve issues from a trauma. And I also have scoliosis, which is a fun condition where your spine twists and turns and makes it difficult to function. It's painful. And even just a few years ago, I was so bad that I was essentially bedridden. I couldn't move. I had friends who were concerned that I was going to be going all the way downhill. And on top of that, with that constant physical pain, as anyone who has chronic pain can tell you, comes the emotional and mental issues that go so hand in hand with it. And so you end up, it just snowballs and snowballs. And the doctors were piling medication at me, doing everything they can. I turned to medical cannabis because it was just it was legalizing, it was becoming new, it was becoming promoted. And the first few times I tried it for that, I will admit that it more just put me to sleep than anything else, which I think is a very common thing with cannabis. Again, it's the start low, go slow. If you take too much, most likely you're just going to
sleep, right?
Pass out, exactly, which is why it's good for sleep.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, which might be very attractive to quite a few people watching.
It's why some people do it.
There's a lot of people who have sleep issues. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cannabis for sleep. And here's a little trick, by the way, because some people talk about indica versus sativa. Which one is the relaxing one? Let's
talk about that. So what are the two things you just named there?
Indica and sativa. They're sort of the two families of marijuana, the types of plant that you can get. They look slightly different. The biggest thing is that sativa tends to be more energizing and indica tends to be more soothing. Now, as time goes by and people do what people do, which is genetically mix things, it's becoming less and less of a thing. It's becoming more and more hybrid, pretty much all the way across the board. The way I have a little trick to remember it is indica puts you in bed, because it knocks you out. And then sativa is just the other one. That's sort of how I recall it.
So you will basically have a different experience, whichever one you're taking.
Most likely. But as I mentioned, hybrids are becoming more and more common, where it's sort of both. The thing that you're going to start hearing more and more and more about with cannabis, get used to this word, is terpenes.
Terpenes, okay.
Terpenes or terps for those of us in the industry.
Okay,
you know?
So what are terps?
Terpenes. These are the things that give cannabis its taste, its smell, and it's also, the more we study, seem to be the elements of it that when it works they work in conjunction with the THC and CBD elements, are what specifically help certain things. For example, I'll give you an example of one. I'm just trying to think of a popular one. Myrcene.
Okay.
Probably a more popular one. It's very sweet. Myrcene is a terpene you find, and terpenes are found in all plants, by the way, not just cannabis.
Okay.
You'll find myrcene in mangoes, for example. But it very specifically seems to help with inflammation. And then you have something like carafilene, that's spicy, peppery. You'll find that in things like cloves and oregano. When that's a heavy terpene, things like colitis, diabetes, anxiety, liver function, for some reason seems to be more greatly affected by that specific terpene.
Okay.
So, and when I say like terpenes, I'd love to list them for you, but so far we've identified over 150 of them.
Okay, so there's a lot.
There's a lot, and I
Okay.
don't think anyone needs to go through that. But
Now you were saying that when you go to the dispensaries, they will have an idea of these different things, but they can't recommend medically.
yes.
But will somebody be there to discuss with you? Like,
absolutely, they'll talk to you. Their best thing that they can do with you is share with you the experiences of the other customers. And this is if you go to a dispensary that's specifically recreational.
Okay.
A medical dispensary is in a different situation. They can give you more specific. And I always recommend, before you start any kind of medical therapy or treatment program, always talk to your doctor first. Get an idea, because especially if you're going to be mixing this with other medications, you want to know what you're getting into, and you want to make sure you're not going to have any sort of negative side effects that are going to impact your experience and impact the cannabis's ability to do what it has to do for you.
But I'd be curious to ask you though, the average family doctor, what is their opinion going to be? Again, I think that, like it's kind of
question.
this, right? Like I'm thinking about my family doctor. I've never discussed this with him before, but I'm wondering, are people going to have doctors that are going to say, no, stay away from that. That's not good for you. Like, because I know, there are a lot of doctors who are still very, very much part of the pharmaceutical as the remedy, the pharmaceutical companies. It's what they know. It's what they've been trained on. Right. So, I mean, are you, what
we're getting better. We're getting there. A big thing with cannabis as it becomes legalized is ongoing education. And that's going to come from people in the industry, from activists, from people who use it. It's going to take all that, because we are dealing with a century of propaganda and misinformation that we are trying to tear down and rip off and get to the seeds of the actual truth. Now, a lot of doctors, particularly if you have, if your medical professional works with a more holistic thing, and by that I don't mean like, holy stuff. I mean, as in the whole body, mental health, different people to
like acupuncture,
exactly.
All of
They're more
naturopaths.
holistic. Yeah. They see the benefits of that. I've been very lucky that, for example, my doctor, when I told him I was looking at medical cannabis, his reaction was, great, go for it.
Okay.
Do your thing, keep me updated. Other people, they're going to have people, they might have a doctor who does not feel the same way. And there are still doctors out there who feel very strongly about it. And we are getting there, and we're getting better and better. The other thing is a lot of doctors, they don't feel comfortable recommending something unless the science proves it. Like there is scientific hard evidence. Right now with cannabis, they haven't been studying it long enough to have what they would decree a comprehensive enough study and solid answer to feel comfortable. That's why a cannabis clinician is different. That is someone who is a doctor, but they specialize in cannabis. They understand what it is. They know what it is. And strangely, we talked before about the illicit market. A lot of the people in the industry are coming from that world, of course, because they were activists. They supported it. These are the people who knew what this plant was capable of before the rest of us got on the trolley, right? So they have a lot of knowledge and information. I usually recommend as well, there are some online sources, for example, Leafly, Leafly, and they do a fantastic job in terms of educating, providing really readable and understandable resources for people to get to better know the plant and understand it a little more before they go off and start using it. So Leafly is a website that people can go to. Like I would suggest, even just for me, if I were going to be trying something, I would let my doctor know, just so that they know what you are sort of diving into, whether they agree with it or not, or recommend it or not, but also do the research, right? I think that do your research. I know. Always. I was just reading an article today about
a new formulation that has been put together, and people from the Shark Tank have invested in with this doctor who's come up with a new formulation that's supposed to be incredible for chronic pain and whatnot. So I would say there's probably a lot of resources that people can dive into to get some more information, because the more I hear about it, and I know a lot of people who have suffered chronic pain. I know a lot of people who deal with insomnia and neurological issues. More and more, it just seems to be affecting so many people nowadays. And I have spoken with people who have really benefited from going off of the pharmaceuticals that they were taking to try to just band-aid the issue, right? Just try to numb the pain rather than dealing with it a little bit more holistically, and have had great success. So I find it quite an interest for me to dig into it. And I know there's a lot of other people that are, but I'm going to be like, I'll tell you my experience. I felt really strange because I went into a dispensary. I think this was a couple of months ago. Again, just more so looking for something to help me sleep. Right. Just for those times where you just can't shut it down and you need help with sleeping. And it was interesting when I went in, because I kind of felt like, at first, strangely, I felt like I was doing something wrong. I felt like I sort of had to explain, I'm only here because I have sleep issues, right? And I think
nothing wrong with using cannabis just for fun, by the way.
Right. Well, and it is legal, but I mean, for somebody who's never really dove into it,
absolutely,
in any way. And then so I was asking the dispenser quite a few questions about what he suggested, and I felt like I had to keep saying I don't want to get high. I'm not here to get high. I felt like and this is a reflection of me, really, but it was interesting, and he was very informative, very helpful, very friendly. I didn't feel like by the time I left, I felt like I had been well advised. I felt like I didn't feel the need to explain my intentions or the reasons I was there. I guess I just want to say that for people who are also hearing of these great benefits, but really feeling like there's still that big divider between them and actually, stepping into this world to get more information.
Well, think about it. Since we were children, we've been hearing pot is bad. You smoke pot, you're going to become a terrorist and a heroin addict. And is it like?
And it's a gateway drug.
It's a gateway drug. And so like my whole life, I'm a good girl. I wanted to, I didn't do marijuana because it's illegal. It's against the law. Like, you can't do that. It's bad. It's evil. And to get over that, it's been grilled into our brains, and it's very hard to push it back. But it's only once you're using it. And it's one of those things, more and more I talk to people about it, the more and more you realize how many people are doing it. And plus have been using it for a very long time on the down low, quietly, to help these things, sort of almost like ashamed. And that is so sad for me, that I've often said that you don't need to be dying to lose your life. And chronic conditions, particularly chronic pain conditions, anything that's neurodegenerative, those things rob you of your life while you're living. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to exist with in a lot of different ways. And the fact that cannabis, not just through so far all the studies that we've seen, but anecdotally, overwhelmingly shows results, is a huge thing, and that's why I think that it should be promoted, not just for individual humans to get their lives back, but the amount of people who are on workers' compensation, who are off work, who are older and suffering because of having these chronic conditions is absolutely massive. And if cannabis can bring that number down that is a huge saving to the government. It's a huge saving to insurance, and that is a winner for everyone. Right now in Canada, despite the fact that cannabis is legal, it's still not covered by insurance companies. And so it's coming out of people's pockets. It's not the most expensive medication you could get, but it's also not the cheapest. And accessibility for cannabis goes beyond just legalization. It goes to your ability to actually get it. It goes to your ability to afford it, and it being an actually accessible medication for you. And so whenever you regulate cannabis, unfortunately, what they've done here, which is just go, okay, it's legal. And they didn't put a lot of the things that they
education,
needed the education and the stuff they needed in line in order to sort of helpfully roll it out. And we're sort of slowly starting to make progress there. Canada is really being watched by the world to go, what happens, what doesn't, what can we do moving forward? Certainly Europe, particularly Germany and countries like that, are looking at legalization and watching Canada very closely to see what we're doing right and wrong.
Right. And I think a lot of people felt that way too when this was being debated, you know, whether we should legalize it or not. A lot of people thought, well, our country's just going to run downhill. As soon as people have access to this legally, we're just going to go downhill as a society. And you know, again, that comes from the narrative and the stigma that's been around it for a long time. But you know, we're even talking about like talking about debilitating issues. You know, we talk chronic pain, we talk physical, but let's talk like mental. I mean, we've just come through 2 years of a pandemic. The amount of mental stress and anxiety that people have been dealing with over this pandemic has, I mean, it's grown the mental health issue, mental health struggles exponentially. So, you know, and from the research I've done, cannabis helps with anxiety. Again, sleep issues, right? Of course, we've talked about that, but the potential for it to be helping with depression, anxiety, mood disorders, issues there. I mean, we're talking about, you know, again, just getting people back to a normal where they can be functioning, they can be contributing in society. I mean, that to me sounds beneficial.
Absolutely. And there's also huge movements, particularly in veterans affairs, to legalize cannabis for PTSD. The fact that it is not legal, and in the United States,
when you say legalize it for PTSD, are you talking about?
Actually, in that case, I was talking about America, because in America, it is still federally illegal.
Right.
But also in Canada, they're talking about how can we provide this, like they don't have to pay for it. It's given to them because of how effective it has shown to be with PTSD and anxiety, by far the most common mental health struggle that people deal with. There are so many different elements of the cannabis plant that seem to help with anxiety, that it's absolute, that they're struggling to figure out which ones are the best, because all of them seem to be working in tandem to have this fantastic effect on relaxing anxiety. And I won't act like if you don't smoke the wrong strain, you can't get a little more actually anxious. Again, it comes down to proper strains and knowing what you're taking and when to take it. But mental health in general, we're seeing it get more and more attention, good, as time goes by. It's something that we're going to be working with. And this is why cannabis is such an extraordinary thing, because this is something that's not only showing that it makes significant improvement to your physical health, but to your mental health, your emotional health, and strangely, your spiritual health. I have yet to meet the person from the heart. Like, I've known people who are the biggest, you know, spiritual nonsense, stuff like that. Even they have that experience. It's almost like you can't not have a profound experience the more you consume cannabis and the more that you adapt to it. And it's something that it's very hard to describe an individual relationship with it. And it sounds so strange, I know, to put it that way, but people who use it know what I'm talking about right now. They know exactly what I'm talking about. And the fact people talk about the addictive nature of it. Is it addictive? Is it not? Relative to other medications, it's not. What I find more than anything is I just miss it when it's gone. When I'm not, I just miss it and wish it were with me.
Right. So yeah, like, do you find, I think that's an important piece to this as well. People being afraid that they will become addicted. So when you say you miss it when it's gone, to what extent? Are you anxious when it's gone? Like, so
I miss it the way you miss a friend, where you're sitting there, life's going on as normal, all of a sudden it pops in your head. Man, I miss it. Back to normal. Back, like, it's just sort of, it, at least for me, that's what I find. And addictive, this is something, can it be habit forming? Yes, it can. Anything that involves process, anything that involves a mental or emotional repetition can be habit forming. And the more you do it, the more habit forming it can become. The thing that's good about cannabis is, if I were to say, go tomorrow, if I go cold turkey off, say, OxyContin or something like that, the physical ramifications of that, the sweats, the shakes, the way your body tries to get it out of its system, it doesn't do that with cannabis. Your body doesn't go through the sort of DTs, the shakes, the problems. And some people will find, if they cut it out of their system entirely for an extended period of time, they might have that a little at the beginning. But taking breaks from cannabis is actually not just common, but recommended to all users, which is to take several weeks off of it, dry periods, to keep the effect of it up. Like anything, the more you take it, the more your body adapts to it, and the less effective it becomes.
Okay.
So taking these dry periods is recommended. And I can't think of any other drug in the world that you would be able to go, oh, I just don't do it for 2 weeks. And then, like, you're like, what?
Yeah.
How is that possible? It is with cannabis.
Yeah. And it's interesting to look at it that way, because, again, a lot of people are like, well, that's why I don't want to take it, because I'm going to get hooked and I'm going to need to rely on it. But if you think about the other medications that you may be taking, it's like,
how is that different from being hooked on Oxy?
Or painkillers of any kind,
or
whether it's Advil or a sleeping medication. Exactly. So you can look at it like it's something that you're taking when you need it, or if you're struggling with chronic pain, then something that you are relying on, and perhaps it's doing less harm in the long run by relying on that than, say, a pharmaceutical that comes with 50 seconds of adverse description at the end of the commercial, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So something to consider there, I think, and inquire about with a medical professional, or as you said,
I consider it habit forming the way maybe a cane is habit forming.
Right.
It's like
a little bit of a
does it. It helps. It helps. So that's why it's there. And being without it is not like people look at you with a cane and go, oh, so weak. They can't handle. Right. No, that's ridiculous. And it's the same with cannabis. This is something that's going to help you. It's like people taking the same reason that people eat healthy or exercise or add these little extras to their life. It makes living easier, more enjoyable, and that's all any of us, I think, are trying to get to, is to that point where life is such a difficult thing. Why make it harder than it has to be? Right.
Now, one of the things I also read about the uses that it's being studied for right now, and perhaps you can speak to it or can't, but I've been hearing about its use for ADHD, attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder in children to certain degrees. Have you read much on that?
Anything regarding cannabis in children, obviously there's a lot of people who are iffy on giving cannabis to children. And I completely understand that. And so that's why things that are CBD heavy are very exciting for people, because it doesn't have that high effect that you, obviously you want to avoid giving that to your children if you can. As I mentioned, THC working in conjunction with CBD seems to provide better results. And when it comes to children's mental, cognitive abilities, again, this comes down to strain, and this is where it becomes difficult, because certain strains will take ADHD and send it off the charts.
Okay.
Some strains will completely quiet and calm them. And this is where it's going to come down to understanding, and the more and more that science is investing in it, being able to take any individual plant and go, it has 15% limonene, it has 10% myrcene, and being able to break it down to those elements will make it so much easier to
like funnel it into different
Exactly.
treatment.
Exactly. It'll be able to be like, okay, cannabis with these specific terpenes are the ones you want with ADHD. So when you go to either a recreational facility or you go to buy something online, then hopefully where we're getting to as an industry is a point where listed on the plant isn't just the THC percentage, but also the terpene content.
Right.
And that will be the stuff that you look at and you're like, okay, I need myrcene for these conditions. Okay, these have different amounts in it. That's what I go with. And over the next few years in the world of cannabis, we're going to hear those more and more for sure.
Well, and I think what would be helpful too, and hopefully this is also coming, is not only will it list those things, but it might describe what it's best used for. So if you are trying to deal with an ADHD person, you know, adult, child, whatever, this is the product you use. If you are dealing with chronic pain, this is the product you use.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with sleep issues, this is the product you use.
Yeah. Once we have those final studies, which again, like every year, it's hundreds and hundreds of studies are being done. Like they're going hard now because they see the benefits here. And a lot of people say, well, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't care about cannabis because they can't copyright a plant, right? You can't own the rights to a plant.
That's right.
What you can own the rights to, though, is the means of extraction, the means of study of the plant, and the means of breaking it down into basic elements. That's a process you can have rights over. So that's where they're going right now, is trying to find out what are the best processes to narrow it down. And once we have plant studies done, then we'll be able to more specifically say, this does this. This does help ADHD. As it stands right now, without those studies, all we can say are that studies suggest it, that anecdotally people have good results, because we don't have final peer-reviewed studies yet. They just don't exist. And the fact is they're not going to exist for several more years because it's a process. Science is a process. We've seen that with COVID, right? Like studies take time, unfortunately, and they can change regarding what you're looking at and what you think works, what you think doesn't. But so far, the studies that are coming out, it's all good. It's all positive, and it's all supporting very much the anecdotal things we've been hearing for years from people who have been partaking.
Right. Okay. And for someone who's a little green, no pun intended.
Cannabis puns.
I was trying to be very punny.
Always. I don't think people can do a cannabis headline without
I don't think you can. No, that's true. That's true.
Legally.
So yes, for someone who doesn't know a ton about how it's been legalized, can you grow it? Can you personally grow an amount for yourself?
In Canada.
In Canada.
And I can't stress this enough. Everywhere you go, check the rules. And for the love of God, do not take cannabis with you to another country.
Yeah, don't travel with it.
You can't do that. Canada, we are a lone island in the world of legalization. There are certain states in the US where it's legal. Again, the US is not federally legal. You cannot take cannabis across borders. Cannot stress this enough. Be very careful with how you transport it.
But are there limits to how much you can grow?
There are. There are usually limits on numbers of plants, and it'll change from place to place. You can find that information fairly easily. And that's one of the biggest things, that for people who do use medical cannabis, the ability to grow your own is huge. Being able to have fresh plant right off the stem, trichome full, and it hasn't been sitting on a shelf for months. It's ready to go. That fresh plant, that it's so much power over your own health. And so a lot of people engage in it. And like I said, it's taking that very personal relationship you kind of end up with cannabis to the next level, right? Where you're actually growing it and funding it. And I will say though, cannabis is a picky plant. She's tough.
Have you ever tried to grow it?
Oh, I would not. I kill cacti.
Okay.
I am not going to. I'm not a plant murderer. I love it too much to kill it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love plants. I don't know if I would dive into trying to grow a marijuana plant. Maybe just as an experiment to see if I could.
Yeah, and
make it happen.
It is definitely doable. There's different ways of growing it, and again, a lot of experimentation. But cannabis has been around for so long. The information is out there. People who know how to do this stuff, the communities, they form very much online. Twitter has a great cannabis community. LinkedIn, particularly for cannabis industry, fantastic place to go to find the latest on scientific studies, on industry changes, on regulations. There are great sources like MG Biz Daily. They are an excellent journalistic source for all news cannabis internationally, and they have some fantastic people around the world doing great work there as well. The information is there, and the best thing I think about people who love cannabis, they love it so much they love to talk about it. If you go up to someone who loves pot and say, hey, tell me more about it, you're going to get what you got, which is me basically babbling endlessly about it, because it's just, you love it so much and you want more people to understand it better, to be better educated about it, to have a fuller understanding of what it actually is. You want to support people and you want to give them that information. And a lot of people in the community feel the same way, I think.
Yeah, and to get past the stigma.
Oh, so much. And there's definitely a lot of people in the community who live that stereotype, the stoner stereotype, you know, and I love them. They're just, they're the sweetest people. They're so freaking nice. Like you'd always hear about how toxic Twitter is. Not cannabis Twitter. Cannabis Twitter is as chill as you can be. So these people, to reach out to them, if you're curious, go anywhere, find any of them, reach out, go, hey, I'm interested in getting involved. You'll be off to the races. They want to talk to you. They want to kill that stigma. They want you to see it for what it really is. And the more people use it, the less and less that will be the stigma. Like, I don't think I really come across as peace, love type, but I use cannabis quite chronically for both medical reasons, but also for recreational. I don't have a glass of wine. I have a joint. And it's
interesting that you say that, because I feel like saying that, even just hearing it, there's still stigma, right? Like, I have a joint sounds it's different, but to say I'm going to go home on a Friday and have half a bottle of wine, most people would be like, hallelujah. Yeah.
And people will tell you, like, they drink, they get in fights, they get in arguments, they make bad decisions. The worst thing I do when I smoke pot is eat too many cookies. The anger, the negative effects that alcohol has on your body, on your mind, on everything, relative, it's not even comparable. The idea to me that cannabis is illegal while alcohol is not just legal, encouraged, fetishized, enjoyed. Like, I like alcohol too, but they're so night and day. And in terms of the damage they would cause, it's not, cannabis is just miles ahead in terms of that. And yet no one thinks twice about being like, I go home and have a 6-pack. Right. That's a lot of beer. Yeah. But I say I have a joint and people sort of, oh, really? Weird. It's like, and then I watch a movie. Like, it's nothing that exciting or crazy or it's enough to help me get where I need to be mentally, emotionally, and physically. And it's allowed me to get my life back. And I cannot stress enough to you what that means.
Okay.
And so I'll be talking this plan up probably till the day I head out for sure.
Right. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. It's again just interesting to see the other side of the coin and to be a little bit more educated. Ask questions. Leafly, Morgan suggested that is a good website to check out with all sorts of information.
But if you really want to check out a great site, check out our website. High-Ground.ca. High Ground Medica is the company, and there's several pages there. We made them as simple as could be very Cannabis 101, a little bit about the plants themselves, a little bit about the different elements like I had been talking about here. Really great, some graphics on terpenes, the different kinds, flavors, things like that, so you can better identify them. Our website's there, and we're also on all the social medias, on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We cannot encourage you enough. Reach out to us. We love to hear it at High Ground Can on Twitter, High Ground Medica on LinkedIn and Facebook. Reach out to us, send us messages, comment on our posts, follow us. We keep up on everything. And if you have questions, we would love to help you where we can, or at least get you steered in the right direction, because we're going to do this by all of us working together.
Yeah, and educating.
Exactly. Right. Educate.
Morgan Dakin with High Ground. You can Google it, but yeah, it's resource rich, and you can get all sorts of information. And again, you can contact High Ground if you have any more questions. Thanks so much for updating us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had so much fun.
And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.